Think, Mark! You'll outlast every fragile, insignificant being on this planet. You'll live to see this world crumble to dust and blow away. Everyone and everything you know will be gone. What will you have after 500 years?
You, Dad. I still have you.
The father-son relationship, of course, is quite a complex one. It is one which develops throughout the course, especially of the son's life. And especially when one is a child and rather naive, they tend to conceive of their father very idealistically, as a hero, somebody that they adore and love. However, when a son usually reaches their teenage years, they begin to view their father with contempt, with resentment. They may view him as a kind of villain even. They may begin to hate him. But when one reaches adulthood and begins to understand the world better and the reality of living in society, of working, of trying to raise a family, and of having to deal especially with one's own traumas from their past, then one begins to view their father not as a hero or a villain, but rather as a human being, a person with their own weaknesses and strengths, with their own traumas, and with their own good qualities about them. And in reality, at times, we are more like our fathers than we want to admit, or we end up adopting or becoming more like our fathers than we want to be comfortable with understanding or admitting. And this is where we begin to humanize our fathers, not as necessarily good or bad people, but as people who did the best with what they can and have ultimately done their best in raising their children, even if, they may not have gone about it in the best ways. Of course, this is not talking about relationships with one's parents where the parent or the father is abusive or overly strict or even neglectful, or a father who is absent from his son's life. Of course, these examples, they are different and should be understood differently. But I think in many cases what a lot of sons, a lot of children can feel on a very intuitive level is that kind of resentment and these mixed feelings simultaneously of love for one's parents, but also of resentment for things that they feel that their fathers or even their mothers, of course, have done wrong to them. But in truth, like I have mentioned, the father and the mother are very much human beings, and one does not necessarily have to love them or hate them, but more so humanize them and understand why they are the way that they are. And oftentimes the children are more like their parents than they want to admit, and they end up inheriting many of the same flaws and strengths as their parents have. If we are to analyze this on a broader level, we can understand that the father represents an already established status, an already established hierarchy, let's say. The father, in many cases, has some kind of work, some kind of money. He is part of a family. He has children. He has a partner, for example. And in this case, then, he represents an already established status within the society. He is part, let's say, not necessarily of the establishment, but he is very much part of the status quo. If you are to take your average, let us say, lower middle class family, and let's say your father works in some kind of specialized field, perhaps, let's say he's a teacher, or, if you want to go upper middle class, maybe he's a doctor or an accountant. So he, of course, is well established. He's well set within society. He has a position. He probably has some kind of communal network as well due to his position. And so the father is secure in that position, and he has this kind of status and authority around him. Especially, of course, he has the natural authority of being the father of the son, but furthermore of providing for him, for protecting him, for being the financial authority, as well as, of course, the biological predecessor to the son. However, of course, after childhood, as the son is growing up, he is seeking to construct his place in the world. He is seeking what you may consider an alternative hierarchy to the already established one which, he has to either work his way through or attain some kind of status through alternative means. And of course, this results in the different approaches. You can have a very conformist approach, right, where the son attempts to attain status within the already given hierarchies or the already given status quo. There can be the more rebellious types, usually when they are younger, who, having that kind of youthful rigor and youthful energy to them, they attempt to seek their own status, or they may just outright rebel and act in reaction to the current status quo. And this, of course, you can see in a lot of young people who rebel against their parents. And of course, this is the case for a lot of young people where they are quite rebellious against the status quo. But gradually, when they grow older, many of them actually become more conservative, perhaps, or they become more conformist, like I've mentioned. Of course, like I've mentioned, there is the rebellious type, which perhaps can be a bit destructive. But there is also the rebellious type, which is incredibly creative, one where there are those who can overcome the limitations of their environment and forge their own path. And these truly creative people, who are not merely reactive nor just conformist, can challenge the status quo of their time successfully, and they can challenge the dominant beliefs or practices, and they can forge their own path, and they can forge this kind of alternative status outside of the established status quo. And of course, within the context of the father-son relationship, there are cases, of course, where although the son may act, let's say, in a destructive manner when he is young, there are also those who can forge their own path, let's say in the example of forging their own way of life or forging their own way of living, for example, in their occupation, in their work, in their family affairs, in a way which is different or in contradistinction to the way that his family does things, for example. Or, for example, he is able to break out of the path that his father expects him to take and forges his own path. And of course, this can apply obviously to the daughter as well. This can apply to all the different children, and of course both to the father and the mother. But I'm specifically talking about the father-son relationship here. And in the case of the father-son relationship, of course, there is that kind of rebellious zeal at times. Of course, this tendency of the young to be rebellious sows the seeds for conflict between the two. As we have mentioned, the father may push their kids to be successful as per their standards. And of course, the reality is that any standard of success is subjective from one man to another. If you ask a lower middle class father what success is, his answer is going to be very different from what a lower class person or from what a upper class person says. Oftentimes, younger people want to choose their own dreams. They want to follow their desires, or not necessarily just lowly desires, but rather these lofty ideals that they have, which at times challenge the status quo, like I've mentioned. They have their own goals or own ambitions in life. Now, of course, this tension or this conflict can be quite destructive for the relationship between the father and the son. And of course, that tension can be a source of resentment where the kids feel that the father is pushing this standard upon them. However, it's important to note that this tension between the father and the son can lead, theoretically at least, to a kind of expansionism, where the son essentially forges his own path, or the tension between the father and the son creates the prerequisite conditions for the son to go out and achieve his own status in the world. And this specific tension can actually apply to the conformist approach just as much as it applies to the rebellious approach. Of course, the ultimate approaches that both of them take will be different. The conformist will try and attain this status and forge his own path, let's say, through the status quo, through the establishment, let's say. But the rebellious type will attempt to break out of it by trying to forge his own path outside of the status quo, by seeking some alternative method or alternative means. Of course, there is also a kind of retreatist or resentful approach where the child retreats within himself and he abandons a kind of desire for success, quote unquote, let's say, or this kind of, he rejects the means essentially that the society is laying out in front of him. Oftentimes this is out of spite for the parents or for society at large and what he feels that they have put him through, but more so at times it's very much a response to trauma or what is perceived to be wrongdoings or injustice by the society towards him. And of course this raises the complicated point here that obviously for many their fathers may be abusive or neglectful, but I think for a vast majority of children, especially in my case and in the case of many, those of us from an immigrant background, our fathers and our mothers indeed as well gave up comfortable lives back home, or well, not so comfortable lives, but in any case, and hustled to give us a good life here in these Western countries. Thus, there isn't anything that these immigrant parents wouldn't do on a material, financial level for their children, and they've done their best to give their children an incredibly comfortable and financially well-off life. Yet, in one of the greatest ironies, perhaps, what their children needed the most wasn't or isn't the material or the financial, but the emotional, the love and care that children need from their parents. It is not that children aren't loved by their parents, it's just that oftentimes parents are not always the best at showing it, and these create the reactions of resentment from their children to their parents at times. Growing up is without a doubt one of the most difficult things a person can go through. The fundamental insecurity about one's place in the world, as reality and the expectations placed upon oneself come crashing onto one's shoulders as they grow up. Adults tend to forget or overlook this fact, and they tend to overlook their own struggles when they were younger. At the same time, the young or the youthful get caught up in their own bubble. They get caught up in their own rashness and naivety at times, and forget their responsibilities to others. They may end up doing more damage in the long run in pursuit of, seeking this kind of youthful optimism, which may border on naivety or even delusion. That youthful vigor is key in challenging, however, what is wrong or even oppressive about the status quo. We know through many examples throughout history that the young generations, or let's say that kind of youthful vigor, when a lot of young generations perhaps did not have the opportunities that they felt they deserved, or at times they felt that they were being wronged or oppressed. There is that kind of youthful vigor to revolution, to acts of rebellion, to acts of resistance, that gives it its dynamism and that successfully allows for it to challenge the status quo. Ultimately, every generation has its battle. To challenge the status quo once more will be the duty of every single generation to come.
This is a waste of everyone's time. There's so much more I could be doing right now.
Go, Mark!
Oh, you're gonna miss it. Look at Mark.
Strike one.
You and I, we made him. He's ours. When he feels joy, we feel joy. See that look on his face? How can you see that and not feel the same way?
Strike two.
As we get older, it's harder to feel that. The weight of the world, it bogs us down.
Nice one, honey!
But our children remind us of the joys in life. It brings us back, shows us what life is all about. This is humanity.
Yeah! Keep going, Mark, keep going!
Come on, Mark!
Go!
Go, Mark, go! Come on, buddy, you can do
Go,
it!
Mark, go, Mark!
Safe!
Did you see that? Did you see?
Oh, that was amazing!
Yeah. Yeah, I saw.